Welcome to the Kingspiration Podcast. This is the place where you'll learn how to get unstuck and gain momentum in your life and business. Each week, we tackle the real aspects of entrepreneurship, personal development, relationships, and fitness. I'm your co-host, Ethan King, from Atlanta, Georgia, USA, entrepreneur, TEDx speaker, and best-selling author of Wealth Beyond Money.
And I'm your co-host, Justin King, no relation to Ethan, from Cape Town, South Africa, entrepreneur, speaker, and business growth strategist. Our journey crosses continents and cultures, sharing wisdom and experiences to propel you forward. Welcome to Kingspiration. Let's start the conversation.
All right. Welcome to the episode. So, Ethan, we are sitting here on a Monday, and I believe you were at PodFest this past weekend. We'd love to hear what that experience was all about.
Yeah, I was honored to be a speaker at PodFest Expo 2024, which was the 10th anniversary of PodFest. It's a huge conference. It was in Orlando, Florida this year, all about podcasting. So you have the whole gamut. I think there were about 800 people or so there. This was my first time attending in person. The first time I attended was virtually, I think in 2020 or 21. And this conference actually holds the Guinness World Record. They've broken 2 Guinness World Records for largest virtual conference. So pretty impressive, huge following, very close-knit community. And I spoke about AI and automation and social media. Went really well. And, you know, whenever you speak at a conference, the best compliment that a speaker can receive is when someone says to you, your session was worth the full ticket price that I paid to come to this conference. And I heard that from multiple people. So super, super humbled and thankful and grateful for that. So I'll talk a little bit about what my last session was, but I won't give the whole thing away. That's probably not fair to the people who paid for their conference ticket. But my keynote was every day, everywhere, all at once. So kind of a nod to the movie, but it's really about showing up on social media and on every channel, every single day, without it sucking up your time. Only 15 minutes of work per day required on your part. So you can be omnipresent on social media and why it's crucial to do that, to have a presence. And with the latest AI tool, with the tools that we have now between ChatGPT and tools like Opus Pro and then tools like Later, scheduling apps, you couldn't do this 2 years ago. I mean, you would have to have like a team of people on staff to really have such a heavy social media presence. But now with these automation tools, you can really be everywhere every day. And for example, I have one social media guy who he posts to all of our, between me and my wife and our businesses, and even for EO Atlanta, I think he posts like 5 or 6 different brands for us every day. And, you know, just it's an amazing time that we live in. So I'll share more about how to get the slides and the recording to my session. But on this episode, I wanted to share with you guys some of the biggest takeaways. Go ahead. You had a question?
Before we get into the meat and potatoes of what it is that you shared, just tell us a little bit more about PodFest itself, because it started in 2010, that must make it one of the oldest podcasting conferences or shows.
Yeah, so PodFest, well, this was the 10th anniversary, so I'm assuming the conference started in 2014. But, you know, a quick note about podcast, the word podcast exists because of the iPod. So before the iPod existed, podcasting was just called internet radio. And I remember when I was working, but before I even started my business, I was working at a newspaper as a graphic designer. And I would, you know, get kind of bored and, you know, you're just sitting there doing kind of mundane work. And I get tired of listening to music in my headphones. So I stumbled on this thing called internet radio. And I started listening to talk shows and business talk shows. And then I heard this guy talking about his book that was coming out. And it was called The Spirituality of Success. So I went and grabbed a copy of the book. That was the first business book I ever read. And he married together spirituality and why it's actually a good thing to be financially successful. And I never heard that before. And that really kind of kicked off my whole entrepreneurial journey. It lit a fire under me. So that was really a podcast, but that was before the iPod was invented. This shows how old I am.
I was going to say, definitely giving away.
Yeah. So yeah, keep sharing. This was part of my message to the podcasters there, because I mean, there are so many I think there are like 4 million podcasts. And one of the sessions actually broke down the podcast statistics and how you can't really trust all of them, because how are we counting podcasts? There may be 4 million podcasts, but do you realize that most podcasts only have one episode, and then the person quits after one episode? Like, they showed us this chart. And it's like, man, why did you even start? But so it's a good thing the way we're doing this, Justin. We kicked off with a whole library of episodes. So the way they have it set up at this conference is, they have the main stage, which only a few sessions were in the main area where we had like lunch and learns where everyone was together, but it was mostly broken up into different tracks. So you have like the AI track, the monetization track, the technology track where they talk about different equipment. So that way it's kind of like choose your own adventure, choose your flavor about what you want to learn about right now that's applicable to you. And then they have it broken up into like your 15-minute talks. So it's almost like TED Talks, but each person is presenting on a different thing and teaching with slides. And then they have the 30-minute talks. So I did one of the 30-minute talks. And then in the bigger sessions, they have some of the longer, like, keynotes and informational sessions. So like, for example, the one I was giving you with the statistics was from Lisbon, and they have all the data, and they did a keynote on the state of podcasting right now. So apparently Apple made some big changes right at the end of the year. So we released our podcast at a really good time, because the changes that Apple made really affected the numbers of, if you were already podcasting, a lot of people saw their numbers drop. And so people were scared, like, oh my God, like, but did people just stop listening to my podcast? But no, that it's just the way Apple started calculating the data differently. And Apple, again, you talked about their impact. They really control the game. So whenever they make a change, it affects the entire industry. So
do you know what that change was?
Let's say you subscribe to a podcast, and then if you don't listen to it after 5 episodes, then they stop auto downloading it for you. So the minute you subscribe using the Apple Podcasts app, it'll start auto downloading. But if you stop listening, it's going to say, well, he's not listening, so we're going to stop auto downloading this to his phone. So that hurts your metrics now. So that was a feature that they fixed within a recent update.
Yeah, I think for existing students, ultimately it does give you a far more measure.
Exactly.
It is actively engaging with your content.
So we started at a good time, because now, so basically the way that they calculate stats now is this is the new normal, and it's more accurate, and it's really more fair. So some surprising statistics, Justin, what is the right episode length? So can you guess, what do you think the average podcast length is in 2024? Well, out of active ones, out of the top 200, let's say that, out of the top 200 podcasts,
12 minutes.
It is actually 71 minutes. 71 minutes is the average. Yeah, I was very surprised by that. The median is 60 minutes, and only 9.5% of the top 200 podcasts are less than 22 minutes. So now I particularly like shorter podcasts, which is why we typically try to keep these episodes less than 20 minutes or so. But apparently I'm in the minority. People really like long podcasts.
The one link that I could possibly make to that median time, or even an hour-long podcast, is the idea of listening to a podcast while exercising. Generally, I think most of us, we put something into our calendar, whether it's an exercise slot or whatever it is, we'll generally allocate 45 minutes for that slot.
Right. Yeah, you are 100% right. You hit the nail on the head. So 73% of the top 200 podcasts are around 40 minutes long. So that's the most popular length right now. And yeah, so podcasts are great when you're doing something else. So if you're on your average commute might be 30 or 40 minutes, or exercise session, there's one guy, he was one of the best speaker sessions that I sat in. He actually came right after me. He gave me huge compliments. But he built up this massive podcast network, and sold it. And he was a very, very early podcaster. I think it's called Horse Radio Network. This guy named Glenn. He was literally talking about the business of horses. And he said, my podcast listeners were literally shoveling shit while listening to my podcast. They were shoveling horse manure. so that to pass the time, they're listening to an industry podcast. So there's so many topics that are addressed, and so many like subcultures in our world. I would have never thought that people are literally listening to podcasts about shoveling shit. And he built a massive network and sold this business. Hugely impressive.
It's so great. It just tells you there is a niche for everyone, or a niche.
Yeah.
A niche
Right.
for everyone.
Right.
Niche for everyone.
Yeah.
I think I almost derailed this a little bit. So back on to some of the key nuggets from
Yeah.
your
No,
talk
you're not.
that you did.
Oh, from my talk.
Yeah.
Well, before we get to that, because you haven't quite derailed it. Like one of my big takeaways was it's really about the host. Like people, I mean, that guy, Glenn, of course, he has a great voice, great radio background, but it's his personality as to why people stay connected to the podcast. Him, his co-host. So a lot of times, a lot of podcasts do interviews have guests on the podcast and do interviews, which we may do at some point. I think it's a good thing to do. But he said where most people make the mistake is they spend too much time on the interview and let the guest talk too much. But if somebody's subscribing to your podcast, it's because they connect with you as the host. So people want to hear you, Justin, or me. They probably want to hear more than me, just because they want to hear that sexy South African accent. But but the thing is that they're connecting with you. So if you are going to do an interview, keep the interview short, and then talk about, then come back on solo or with your co-host and talk about your takeaways from the interview, because that's why people are tuning in. They don't want to hear your guest ramble on, because it's all about you. So that was a big takeaway there. And then, yeah, as far as my segment, it was very tactical. It was about marketing in a digital marketing space and how to get more done in less time, which is really, the more I think about it, all of my messaging is around that, whether it comes to business or fitness, marketing, whatever you're trying to do. I believe that there's always a faster way to achieve your ambitions if you look at things a little bit differently and pay attention to the tools that are available to you. And sometimes you can connect the dots in a not so obvious way that can get you to your desired outcome a lot faster.
First, you've got to collect the dots before you can connect the dots. So I think just based on what you were saying now, you've got to be collecting that information along the way. I mean, our brains are pattern recognition machines. So collect those dots, make sure that you're taking in all that information, and then it's so much easier to be connecting it. So that always comes to mind.
Man.
Yeah, somebody said that. Sorry, I interrupted you there, but
that's perfect. See, this is why I like. No, this is why I like talking to you, because you always drop those great microscripts, those great nuggets. I never heard it put that way. Collect the dots. You got to collect the dots before you can connect the dots. That's fantastic. And it also makes me think of Steve Jobs' famous commencement speech. If you guys haven't seen that yet, go look it up on YouTube. It is one of the most life-changing talks ever. I think it was at Stanford University in 2005 or something like that. Or anyway, he says you can only connect the dots looking backwards. When we're going through life, things don't make any sense. It may feel like we're in a mess. I mean, if you look at Steve Jobs, he got fired from Apple, the company that he founded, and, he was stressed out and cancer. But looking backwards, he was able to connect the dots of his path, of his journey, and then it all makes sense. So, yeah, I like the way you put that there. All right, that was a bit of a tangent, but I think it was an important life lesson.
Yeah. I've always got so many things that having this chat. Jumping back, I'm going to jumping back to some of the stuff that you said, sharing some of the statistics and those incredible learnings from, did we say his name is Greg?
Glenn. Yeah, Glenn.
Glenn. My brother's name is Glenn. So what is great to hear, particularly when, like ourselves, we started a podcast and we're looking to see this stuff. Always to hear that you're on the right track with the way you've approached something. And I'm trying to think. I was saying, I can't remember. I was saying to somebody, we were in the car together, and we had the GPS going just to keep us on track. And it wasn't a case of the GPS actually having to take us to our destination. I had a rough idea of where we were and where we were, but just to know, again, it was giving me that confident little boost to know you're still on the right track. And so often we need that in life, or we need to give it to the people around us. It's just that little pat on the back, and it's a well done. You are still on the right track. You're making the right decisions. You're doing it the right way. I would never have thought about going that way, but it's still going to get you to the right destination. It just makes the world of difference. So that's so good to hear that. Just fills me with a lot more confidence. Keep going.
Yeah, keep going. Yeah, you got to keep going. And I think everyone in that crowd at PodFest needed to hear that, because when you're podcasting, especially if you're podcasting alone, it can just feel like you're speaking into a vacuum, right? At least Justin, you and I have each other to have a conversation with. Imagine how hard it is to keep going. I think about my wife, Monica. She's been doing her podcast now for 4 years, but she does have guest interviews every now and then, but a lot of times it's just a solo episode. And something else that Glenn said, he came from a background in theater. And, when you're on stage, you get immediate response from the crowd. So if a joke landed because people laugh or people applaud, or you get a reaction from the audience. But with podcasting, you don't get that. And you might get lucky if someone sends you an email 2 weeks later and says, oh, that thing you said, that was funny, or that thing was really impactful, or you read some reviews. So everyone listening to this, please go leave us a review, give us some feedback, shoot us an email, shoot us a message on LinkedIn or Instagram, find us wherever you can and show us some love, give us some feedback, actually good or bad. And not just for us, but your other favorite podcasters. Imagine that they're on stage sharing information with you, and they're not hearing anything from the audience. It's like the audience is muted. So do a favor, reach back out and show your podcaster some feedback love.
Feedback is a gift.
It is a gift.
Feedback is a gift. I think that is a great note to wrap this one up on. Anything else to add?
All right, yeah. No, let's do it. I'll talk more about my presentation later. Again, I want to be fair to the audience that paid to their money to get there and hear my talk. So I don't want to talk too much about it, but I will share with you guys later about how to get a copy of my presentation every day, everywhere, all at once. That's a wrap for today's episode of Kingspiration. We hope this conversation sparked insights to ignite action in your life and business.
We're on this journey together, sharing our challenges and successes to help all of us take the next step towards building momentum and ultimately reaching our goals.
If you found value in today's episode, please share it with someone else who might benefit and leave us a 5-star review.
And remember to hit subscribe so you don't miss out on our weekly conversations. Until next time, keep rolling, keep growing, and keep being inspired.